He said, I have signed all the other actors, and they're all in the pilot, and you were not, and you will have to be in last position. I said, well, I'm not going to be very comfortable with that. Then he turned to the casting man, who was also in the office, and he said, sign him up, and don't pay him too much money.
In the mid-1960s, television audiences were captivated by a bold new adventure that carried one ordinary family into the unknown reaches of outer space. Lost in Space quickly became one of CBS's biggest science fiction hits, combining family drama, imaginative worlds, and unforgettable characters. Yet behind the colorful alien landscapes and the iconic robot lay a very different story, one filled with creative battles, controversial decisions, and episodes that became some of the most talked-about chapters in the show's history. While millions of viewers remember the series as a lighthearted classic, several productions generated enough concern that networks quietly distanced themselves from them, leaving fans to wonder what really happened behind the scenes. One of the most controversial stories centered on a third-season episode known as Castles in Space. By this point in the show's run, Lost in Space had changed dramatically from its darker beginnings. The Robinson family was no longer simply struggling to survive on a dangerous alien planet. Instead, they found themselves visiting bizarre civilizations, battling strange villains, and exploring increasingly colorful fantasy worlds. Ratings remained strong, but the tone had become far more playful than the serious science fiction drama originally envisioned. Castles in Space followed the Robinsons to a frozen world where Dr. Smith accidentally awakened an ice princess who had been trapped in suspended animation. Soon afterward, an aggressive bounty hunter named Chavo arrived, determined to capture her. On paper, the story promised another entertaining adventure complete with icy castles, futuristic weapons, and dramatic confrontations. However, once network executives reviewed the finished episode, attention quickly shifted away from the plot itself. The biggest concern became the portrayal of Chavo. Played with exaggerated makeup, mannerisms, and a highly stereotypical accent, the character resembled an old-fashioned caricature rather than a believable science fiction villain. His behavior relied heavily on ethnic stereotypes that many station managers considered inappropriate, even by the standards of the 1960s. One particularly memorable sequence featured Chavo using tequila to intoxicate the robot in an attempt to obtain information. While the scene was intended as comedy, many viewers and television executives felt it crossed the line into offensive territory. Rather than being viewed as harmless humor, it reinforced stereotypes that were already becoming increasingly controversial. The reaction varied across the country. Several local television affiliates reportedly decided not to air the episode during its scheduled broadcast. Instead, they substituted movies, local programming, or sports broadcasts. For viewers expecting another weekly adventure aboard the Jupiter 2, the sudden schedule change came without warning. Although CBS never publicly promoted the controversy, the episode quietly gained a reputation as one that some stations preferred to avoid. During later syndication packages, certain local broadcasters reportedly skipped over it entirely rather than risk complaints from viewers. Whether every station participated or not, the incident demonstrated how changing cultural attitudes could dramatically affect programming decisions. For television historians, Castles in Space became an example of how quickly entertainment standards can evolve. What had once been considered acceptable family television was beginning to face much greater scrutiny, forcing producers throughout Hollywood to reconsider how minority characters were portrayed on screen. Yet even that controversy was overshadowed by another production that almost nobody saw for decades. Long before audiences ever met Dr. Smith or heard the robot warn, "Danger, Will Robinson," Lost in Space existed in a completely different form. That version was the original pilot episode titled No Place to Hide. Creating the pilot required an enormous financial gamble. Producer Irwin Allen invested approximately $600,000, a staggering amount for television production during the mid-1960s. The budget allowed for elaborate spacecraft interiors, detailed miniature effects, expansive sound stages, and ambitious visual effects rarely seen on weekly television. Allen envisioned a serious science fiction drama that emphasized survival rather than comedy. The Robinson family traveled aboard the spacecraft Gemini 12 on a dangerous mission to colonize a distant world near Alpha Centauri. When disaster struck during the journey, They became stranded in an unforgiving alien environment filled with deadly weather and mysterious creatures. The pilot treated space exploration with remarkable seriousness. Dialogue focused on scientific problems, survival strategies, and the emotional pressures of isolation. Compared with the colorful series audiences eventually embraced, this early version felt darker, slower, and much more realistic. When CBS executives viewed the completed pilot, however, they reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Despite its impressive production values, something important seemed to be missing. The biggest issue wasn't the visual effects or the performances. Instead, executives believed the story lacked personality. The original pilot featured neither Dr. Zachary Smith nor the famous robot, two characters who would eventually define the franchise. Without a recurring antagonist creating conflict among the crew, executives worried that each episode would become little more than a survival exercise. Likewise, without the robot providing memorable interactions and moments of humor, the show risked becoming emotionally distant for family audiences. Network officials feared younger viewers would struggle to connect with such a serious production. Rather than approving the pilot as it stood, they ordered Irwin Allen to make sweeping changes before the series could move forward. The decision transformed the future of Lost in Space. Instead of abandoning the expensive footage altogether, Allen returned to production with a revised plan. New scenes were filmed, fresh characters were introduced, and much of the existing material was carefully re-edited into a completely different premiere. The original pilot disappeared into the studio vault, remaining unseen by the public for decades. The changes altered nearly every aspect of the show. The addition of Dr. Smith introduced internal conflict that kept audiences guessing each week, while the robot added warmth, humor, and emotional appeal. Together, those two characters fundamentally reshaped the identity of the series. Looking back today, many television historians consider the rejected pilot one of the most fascinating what-if stories in science fiction history. Had CBS approved the original version, Lost in Space might have become a gritty survival drama remembered very differently from the colorful family adventure that ultimately became a cultural icon. The decision to lock away No Place to Hide wasn't simply about replacing one episode with another. It represented a complete change in creative philosophy. Instead of emphasizing realism and danger, the network chose accessibility, humor, and memorable characters. That choice would influence every season that followed and help turn the series into one of the defining television adventures of the 1960s. Ironically, the very character created to solve the pilot's biggest weakness would soon become the show's greatest star. Dr. Zachary Smith had originally been introduced as nothing more than a dangerous saboteur, but what happened next would completely transform not only his character, but the entire direction of Lost in Space. When CBS ordered major changes to the original Lost in Space pilot, producer Irwin Allen faced an enormous challenge. The network wanted a stronger source of conflict, someone who could keep viewers invested from week to week. The solution came in the form of a new character who would eventually become one of television's most recognizable villains, Dr. Zachary Smith. Smith made his debut in the revised premiere, The Reluctant Stowaway. At first, he was nothing like the eccentric schemer fans would come to love. The original scripts portrayed him as a ruthless foreign agent whose sole mission was to sabotage the Robinson family's journey into space. Cold, calculating, and willing to sacrifice innocent lives, Smith was intended to be a straightforward villain who would likely disappear after only a few episodes. His plan was simple but deadly. Before launch, he secretly programmed the B-9 environmental control robot to destroy the spacecraft's guidance system. The sabotage sent the Jupiter too hopelessly off course, leaving the Robinson family stranded deep in space. Ironically, Smith's own plan backfired when he became trapped aboard the ship during liftoff, forcing him to share the same dangerous fate as the people he had tried to destroy. While filming progressed, veteran actor Jonathan Harris began to question the character's future. He realized that a purely evil saboteur had limited potential in a family television series. Eventually, the Robinsons would have little reason to keep such a dangerous criminal alive, and Smith would almost certainly be killed off or abandoned on some distant planet. Rather than accept that fate, Harris quietly began reshaping the character during rehearsals and filming. Instead of delivering every line with cold menace, He introduced dramatic gestures, exaggerated expressions, and theatrical humor. He transformed Smith into a pompous coward whose selfishness often created problems but whose panic and elaborate excuses made him strangely entertaining. Harris also started improvising many of the colorful insults and dramatic outbursts that later became trademarks of the series. His interactions with the robot evolved from tense confrontations into comedic exchanges that audiences eagerly anticipated. Suddenly, scenes originally intended to build suspense were generating laughter instead. When producers reviewed the daily footage, they immediately recognized something unexpected. Harris had stumbled onto a version of Dr. Smith that was far more engaging than the ruthless spy described in the script. Instead of fearing him, viewers would likely enjoy watching his endless schemes collapse around him. The discovery forced another major creative shift. Editors softened many of Smith's darker moments, trimming scenes that portrayed him as a cold-blooded killer. Dialogue emphasizing his murderous intentions was reduced, while humorous exchanges received greater attention during editing. As production continued, Smith gradually transformed from the show's primary villain into its most entertaining source of comic relief. That single decision changed the identity of Lost in Space. The relationship between Dr. Smith, young Will Robinson, and the robot quickly became the emotional center of the series. Their chemistry proved so popular that later episodes increasingly revolved around their adventures, rather than the Robinson family's original survival mission. Although some longtime fans preferred the darker tone of the first season, there is little doubt that Jonathan Harris's reinvention of Dr. Smith helped make the series unforgettable. His performance became one of classic television's defining character portrayals and remains one of the biggest reasons the show continues to be remembered decades later. As Lost in Space entered its second and third seasons, it embraced a brighter, more imaginative style. The series transitioned from black and white to vivid color, featuring elaborate alien costumes, futuristic sets, and increasingly whimsical storylines. While critics often dismissed the shift toward campier adventures, younger audiences embraced the colorful worlds and larger-than-life characters. The timing of that transformation was no accident. During the mid-1960s, television faced fierce competition from ABC's wildly successful Batman series, whose bright visuals and playful storytelling captured enormous ratings. Rather than compete with realism, Lost in Space leaned fully into fantasy, becoming one of the most visually distinctive science fiction programs of its era. Despite mixed reviews from critics, audiences remained loyal. Families gathered every week to watch the Robinsons encounter strange civilizations, bizarre monsters, and unforgettable adventures across the galaxy. Over time, the series developed a devoted following that extended far beyond its original network run. After ending in 1968, Lost in Space found new life through syndication. Afternoon reruns introduced the series to an entirely new generation of viewers, many of whom grew up repeating the robot's famous warning, "Danger, Will Robinson." The show's popularity continued to grow long after critics had dismissed it, proving that audience affection often outlasts contemporary reviews. Its influence also extended beyond television. The success of the franchise inspired comic books, toys, lunchboxes, trading cards, model kits, feature films, and eventually a modern streaming adaptation that introduced the Robinson family to new audiences. What began as a risky television experiment evolved into one of science fiction's most enduring brands. Behind the scenes, the cast remained closely connected. Jonathan Harris and Bill Mumy developed a genuine friendship that lasted throughout their lives. June Lockhart continued acting while supporting educational programs connected with space exploration. Bill Mumy built a successful career as an actor, musician, writer, and voice performer. Other cast members pursued diverse careers while continuing to celebrate the show's lasting legacy through reunions and fan conventions. Looking back today, many of the dramatic stories surrounding Lost in Space have become almost as fascinating as the episodes themselves. The original pilot remained hidden for decades before finally reaching the public. Dr. Smith's unexpected transformation completely altered the direction of the series, and controversial episodes like Castles in Space continue to spark discussion about how television reflects the cultural attitudes of its time. However, it's also important to separate fact from legend. While the original pilot was indeed shelved and substantially reworked before broadcast, and Dr. Smith's character evolved significantly during production, claims that certain episodes remain officially banned today are often exaggerated. Most episodes of Lost in Space are now available through home media releases and streaming services, even if some attracted controversy or were occasionally skipped by individual stations during syndication. Perhaps that distinction makes the show's history even more fascinating. Rather than disappearing forever, these productions survived as reminders of how television evolves alongside society. Decisions made by networks, producers, actors, and local broadcasters all helped shape what audiences ultimately saw on screen. More than half a century after its debut, Lost in Space remains a landmark in television history, not only because of its imaginative adventures, but because of the remarkable behind-the-scenes decisions that transformed it from a serious science fiction experiment into one of the most beloved family series ever produced. The Robinson family's journey through the stars continues to inspire new generations, proving that the greatest adventures aren't always found on screen. Sometimes, they're hidden behind the camera, waiting to be discovered.